Welcome to First Builders, the podcast for those who shape companies from the ground up. I'm Amber Illig, founder and general partner at the Council Capital.
And I'm Rachel Tsui, partner at the Council. On this show, we talk to operators who joined before the outcome was obvious and helped create it.
And today we have a special guest, co-founder and CEO of our Fund One portfolio company, Trially, a company that's rethinking how clinical trials are run at the site level.
And Kyle actually came up inside the Epic and Cerner ecosystems, working directly in EHR implementations and integrations at clinical trial sites. And this is a system that doctors use to track patients, and it's one of the most highest friction and also most operationally complex environments in healthcare.
Yeah, if you've never heard of Epic, you definitely have indirectly been inside of it or using it in some way with your doctor. So, and if you've ever been close to a central software implementation inside of a legacy industry, you know that this is where things break. Systems don't talk to each other, workflows are stitched together manually, and the people that are holding it all together are often overwhelmed.
Yeah, and Trially's founding team consists of 3 co-founders, Kyle, along with his co-founders Trevor Welch and Ramon Prieto, who both come from Zapier. And we really love this combination of expertise with Kyle really understanding healthcare's messiest infrastructure layer on the EHR side, and then Trevor and Ramon's product and AI training in abstraction, automation, and building scalable products. And it's really been exciting to see their journey in building.
Kyle, welcome to First Builders.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited to chat.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, let's dive in. Let's start with your time just like around working with like Epic and Cerner ecosystems. For people who haven't been in that, what does an EHR implementation actually look like on the ground?
And I'm going to chime in. What is an EHR for anybody that isn't in the healthcare industry that's listening to this?
Yeah, thank you for doing that. And keep doing that because I am so bad at using industry terms. So electronic health records, or you might hear electronic medical records, EHR, EMR. There's some differences, but we don't need to split those hairs. Yeah, question on what an implementation looks like there. So I worked with Epic and Cerner, which tended to implement with the largest health systems. So like my time at Epic was largely spent with Providence Health and Services, who's this huge system on the West Coast. You guys probably seen them. It was like a massive 4-state, 4-instance, like hundreds and thousands of people to go implement with. And a lot of the doctors that was very early days for me, that a lot of those doctors were switching from paper to electronic charts. So you can imagine what a mess that was, But yeah, coordination of a ton of people, a massive amount of change management, trial by fire when it's your first job too. I remember coming out and my first professional presentation was to about 1,000 Providence physicians trying to get their feedback on the product and how we should build it. It's a
No
big
pressure.
messy, yeah, it's like just a big, messy, go get it done, type of thing, but also like structured chaos at the same time. I don't know. It's too big a question to actually answer.
Yeah, and especially in a clinical trial setting, what makes working with EHRs different and more complex? And how did you even get excited about the clinical trial space?
Yeah, it was really just an extension. It kind of became this amalgamation of all of my experiences. So I worked for Epic and Cerner, and then got into consulting with big health systems on actually like value-based care type work, more like population health type of things. So that forced me to get into these EMRs and claim systems and get that data out and use it for value-based care. I met a group doing research in Phoenix across about 25 different physician groups, all different EMRs, and basically have the same problems. Like we need to get these patients out so that we can help figure out which of them we should be, alerting and bringing into clinical research. And so I sort of fell backwards into it. I just knew folks doing clinical research. The thing I had been doing for the last 15 years was kind of a perfect fit. And so I jumped in and helped them use the same data I was using for other things, just for clinical research. And that's really where Trially was born. I just got deep into that problem space and saw that it wasn't just their problem. It was really like even the largest systems, the folks doing the most research, like Johns Hopkins and Mayo and all these really large health systems, still rely on extremely manual processes to get that work done. And so that's where Trially was born.
Nice. And then we talk a lot, just at the council and like around like first builders is how these operators that are first builders are creating order from chaos. And you kind of talked a little bit about that when you were describing, on site solving EHR problems. Were there playbooks that you had like at Epic or Cerner, or did you have to also invent them?
What a good question. I mean, definitely we're inventing them because there are just unique problems here. Like it's a different regulatory space than being in your provider side of the world. It's slower, honestly. Like we often joke that, like healthcare is 10 years behind the rest of the world from a technology perspective. Clinical trials is like 10 years behind that. It's just really slow. And that's on purpose, largely because that, like we have to produce really high quality data and we need like they take things slowly and they don't they're more fast followers than they are going to be like out in the front. So all that to say, we've had to create new playbooks for that and to definitely like get in and work with these folks. But definitely leveraged a lot of things I did at Epic too. Like I remember sitting at Epic, they have like a 10 commandments that drive the company. And that 10 commandments was posted in every bathroom. So like while you were in the bathroom, going to the bathroom, the 10 commandments were right there in front of you. And then kind of similar for Trevor and Ramon, like Zapier is a really values driven kind of commandments, driven company. That's been really important to us. Like bringing those values to our employees is a big part of our playbook, and that came from our experiences at those previous companies. But yeah, I mean, like navigating the world of clinical trials needed its own playbooks too. Like I have connected to EMRs. I don't know how many times in my career now, hundreds, if not thousands of times now. And it's very different when you're coming at it from the provider view. But when you're the researcher asking for that same permission, you have to have a different conversation and inspire a different level of trust in the fact that we're connecting into this data. So that was a new playbook for me. It's like, what are the things that I need to do to instill that trust from the outset so that we can work with these providers on recruiting patients into their studies? Hopefully that was helpful.
Yeah, super helpful. Yeah. And what would you say kind of broke the most often in those early days? And how did that environment force you to develop adaptability?
Yeah, I mean, it shouldn't be surprising given like Zapier roots from my co-founders, but we're really like a system about connecting other systems. We're playing the middleman between a lot of different systems. And that's just like, it's a very prone to break space, especially when you're working with EMRs that are largely built in like the 70s on code systems that don't even exist anymore. And yeah, I mean, like definitely getting into a lot of these smaller EMRs that, don't have a ton of connections. Those break all the time and we're constantly refixing those. We're also connecting into all these clinical trial management systems that literally like haven't had APIs until like a year ago, or even some of them very, very recently. So they're starting to adapt to the times largely because companies like us are going to them saying like, our customer expects us to connect to you. So those things break all the time. Those are
Yeah.
companies that aren't necessarily like made to be interoperable, kind of on purpose at times, depending on how spicy we want to get here. But so those things break, and yeah, that's been painful, but also like kind of our value prop, like we're willing to be in there and fighting those fights with you and for you to make sure your systems all talk to each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we talked about, you've referenced your co-founders a couple of times. And something I've long wondered about is there ever some sort of like cultural clash coming from two totally different industries, like Zapier versus EHR integrations? How does that all work out on the ground?
Man, yes. But in the best way. Like I am so glad I started this company with the two people that I did. But yeah, I mean, it's been like, it's actually one of the things I loved about getting to work with Trevor and Ramon at the outset was like bring this like background in traditional healthcare with big legacy systems, but bring in expertise from outside of that can really challenge that and build things that no one maybe is thinking about inside of that system. Trevor actually, for most of my career, has been my buddy, my software engineer friend from like Silicon Valley Tech that I would take these gnarly healthcare problems to and be like, what would a modern engineer do with this? And that's where Trilate came from, really. But all that to say, like, yeah, when you work with a company like Zapier, which has very traditional like SaaS growth approach, like it's very, you sign up and you get going right away. We're dealing with healthcare data that is very, very sensitive, requires a ton of trust, requires a ton of security. Those implementations just take time, and so like that's one area where we've clashed is like, well, a SaaS company would do this. I'm like, well, we are a SaaS company, but we have to also clear these, regulatory hurdles or
Totally.
security vendor assessments that we've got to get through. And so I would say that's one of them. There's probably others that if I spent enough time thinking about it.
Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. But
Super.
it
I
makes a
feel
lot.
like that's a healthy butting of heads
Exactly.
there. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think totally necessary too. I think it's great to have like people who are not in the healthcare industry actually come in and try to like rethink things from the ground up as well. But then having someone who has that healthcare expertise to say, hey, okay, but that's all great. We do need to make sure it's still within all the regulatory frameworks, like you were saying. So it's really good to have that in there.
Especially in this time, in the age of AI, I do think healthcare is accelerating into that quickly and maybe even faster than other industries, which is so cool to watch and be a part of. But that brings its own challenges too. Like, understanding how those things are going to fit into the healthcare space, pushing the boundaries on it some, like when you can. It's just an interesting time to, like to have the intersection of like newer technology into the world. It seems to be really well accepted, but you still have to like scale that into these large scale legacy solutions.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's honestly a fascinating time to be building.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
there's sort of this unprecedented adoption of AI products. But as you know, like the rubber's going to hit the road if you're not providing true ROI or doing things the right way within the regulatory framework. Like within a year, you're going to churn out. So it's important to have those domain experts alongside of the venture scale like mindset and that growth mindset as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to be now like constantly thinking about what's a moat and like how do you stay defensible and how do you not just get bumped out by Epic for releasing the same thing you do or and I don't know if anyone actually knows all those answers, but I think like I do really like the space we're building into. I think it has some interesting moats, but it's really interesting to think about, like what is a hospital system in the future just going to go vibe code themselves versus, like what are those systems they actually need and can't do that. So yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And then, we talked a little bit about like what Trially is doing. I know when we first chatted, it was really around like servicing the sites, right? And we all know clinical trials are super important to pharma, and oftentimes people are selling directly into pharma first. But Trially was unique in like thinking about just like, the resources at a site level, the fact that that was under resourced. Yeah, I was curious, why was that kind of the bottleneck that you wanted to focus on? And what you've learned from doing that.
Yeah,
And
multiple. Go ahead.
note from the peanut crowd, what is a site? Like
Yeah.
for people that don't understand clinical
Yes.
trials, is this the site where trials are happening? Like what's happening?
Thank you. Yes. When we say site, it is where the clinical research is happening. So like very high level view, pharma company wants to prove a drug works so that they can release it to the market. Right now, there's Lyme disease trials, for example, that are happening. We're a part of to get a vaccine out for Lyme disease. You have to prove it works, and you have to run it against across a phase of trials. But those trials are run at sites. They have to be independent sites that do the research, bring the data together, and then hand it to pharma so that they can prove the drug works. Those sites can be anything from single physician office with 5,000 patients in a single doc, all the way up to, like we referenced before, Johns Hopkins or really large scale health systems. And so, yeah, we chose to focus on the site side of that because I come from the site side of that. So I worked in the clinical research site side of the world, and no research happens unless the site does it. Like pharma needs sites to do this work. And we at the sites that I worked at were very used to pharma kind of like shoving technologies down our throats that didn't work well, weren't thought out for the site, just like wasn't a good fit. And so we knew that we needed to build a technology sites loved and wanted to use and would even pay to use. And so that's why we started there. The other side of it is, it's significantly faster sales cycles, significantly easier, less red tape to go through. But ultimately, we just wanted to build a product sites really love and want to use. And then if you do that, sponsors will have no choice. Pharma companies, sponsors will have no choice but to work with you on those. And so, yeah, still like working our way there, but really starting to actually get into the CRO sponsor side of things now that we're a little bit deeper into it.
What about sort of the world that you're operating in with clinical trials and focusing on sites is an area that most investors that you've chatted with kind of miss? And what's a part of the process that I guess outsiders can consistently underestimate?
What's
And
something?
outsiders can be the investors. I could think they're just a good example of outsiders.
Yeah, some are insiders and some are
Yeah.
outsiders. What's an underestimated thing that people don't expect in this space? Yeah. I mean, I think we kind of already hit it, but it's like, there's a really interesting post on LinkedIn the other day that was about this trope that like you connect to one EMR, you've connected to one EMR. So like the idea being that there's no carryover between EMRs. And I think it's really, people know it's hard to do, but people still underestimate how hard that work is, and how, like, really for us, that becomes very, very defensible work. Is once you get into those EMRs with folks, you're really tightly connected with them and working on some of their most sensitive data, but it's hard work. Like it's not for the faint of heart. It takes somebody that's been in the space and knows the space really well. That's one thing. The other that's really interesting, is even just a few patients, making the difference by adding a couple of patients to a trial, like helping recruit a couple of patients into a trial, is extremely meaningful. And sometimes when you talk to somebody from outside the industry and you're like, yeah, we just had this huge success. We put 5 patients on an oncology trial, which we actually just did put 5 patients in an oncology
Nice.
trial in
Congrats.
Florida, which we're really stoked about. Doesn't sound like a lot, but it's extremely meaningful to a trial where they only maybe need to recruit 20 people to show that a drug's effective. It's like if you can put a quarter of the people on that trial, it's a massive win for the site and for the sponsor and for the patient. Like we're really stoked about that result, because this was a late stage oncology trial. Those folks may not have ever been found in the EMR to be put on this trial and have a chance to be given a life-saving treatment through this trial. So like, it's also extremely like personally and clinically meaningful to do that. So I think people underestimate though, like it sometimes sounds like small numbers, but they're extremely meaningful in our space.
Yeah. And I want to go back to the first thing that you said though, like just like the hard work that's involved in it, like the integration into the EMRs and just like the aspect of that. What do you think is like the challenge there? Is it like the workflow? Is it misaligned incentives in like the systems themselves? Is it the technology that's either outdated or needs to be, kind of more aligned or updated? Like, how do you think about like the challenges specifically?
Yeah, it's a little bit like death by a thousand cuts, is it's all those things you just said. From a technology and data standards perspective, there are data standards like FHIR, and there's requirements like USCDI as a government requirement for how those standards should be implemented. But like forcing an EMR company to effectively update their USCDI, bulk FHIR, to use a bunch of industry terms, like to update their data standards, and the way that API actually works is differently implemented and differently enforced across the industry. So, like the big ones tend to do a pretty decent job of it, and then you get to smaller EMRs and it's shoddy. So that's one thing. I would also say there's a workflow component. Everybody, like generally you get like 80% of the data is in the same place, but folks document and do different workflows. And so you do have to get in and really work with your customer to say like, we got 80%, now let's go get the other, hopefully 20, but maybe we don't get all the way to 100. And then the last would be, um, I never know the quite the right word to say, but a political or operational challenge. Like ultimately we have to establish a data connection and work with this clinical data. And there are political steps to take there, I guess, or like operational steps to take there to convince folks to let us do that work with them to actually connect to that data. So that what that actually means is like the leadership has to buy in and say, yes, this is the thing we want to do. Security assessment has to get done. There's all these like steps to take in the process. And that can, that can be a challenge sometimes if you're not willing to like work through that.
Yeah, what's sort of like the hook that's gotten them over the line most of the time? Or is it
It's
different
not
for everyone?
It's not. It's actually pretty much the same. It's not sexy. It's really pretty straightforward. Like we work with a lot of research teams that don't have an EMR background. And so they're coming to the doc like, hey, doc, we'd love to like connect to your data and use it, and that's not a great pitch. But just being able to go in and say like, hey, I worked for Epic, I worked for Cerner, I worked with University of Virginia and Ochsner on their data platforms. I know how to keep your data really safe. And here's the 100 things we're doing to keep your data really safe. Pretty high hit rate for that. Like that's really it. You just have to establish credibility up front. And then usually it's a 5-minute conversation with at a physician group, like the docs that hold the keys, or, the IT team, being able to talk about what a smart sheet is to an Epic implementer also helps quite a bit. So it's really just credibility. I think like being able to say you've been in the space helps a massive amount.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like that's so underestimated. We've seen that across our portfolio with you and others. Just being able to walk into the room and have that first conversation, it completely sets a different direction for the entire deal. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, like we've gotten more experience as a company too across multiple EMRs, being able to say, many EMRs, we've been able to say like, yep, done it many times before. Here's exactly how we connect to Athena. Here's exactly how we connect to Epic here, so
Yeah.
yeah.
And from their
Totally.
perspective, like, how are you sort of walking them through, like, what happens if nothing changes, if they don't use your product?
Say that a different way. What do you mean by that?
I guess, like, so
Well, like
if
what
they
is
don't
their
use Triley, like, what's the impact to their company? What's the impact to even just broader healthcare in general?
Yeah, I think it really jumps out. Like if we can get a demo in front of people and actually talk through it, it really jumps out. But most organizations on some varying level of scale to this, like there's a hospital system. I'm in Kansas City. There's a hospital system nearby we just talked to. They do a lot of cardiology research. They have 40 full-time research assistants who are reading their Epic EMR every day to find patients that
Oh
are
my goodness.
eligible for their 500 different trials they're running at any
Wow.
time. We could do all of that in seconds. Like we can run all 500 of your trials across all of your EMR and it's just done fast. And so that's the big thing is you're just wasting a lot of time and a lot of people hours on things that they could be spending more time on. Like if we just get like really, really tactical and financial, those people's time, the system actually gets paid for those people being in a room with a patient running a trial visit. So like if we can take them out of the reading the EMR part where they don't get paid and put them in the room with the patient, then save a bunch of time, make a lot more money. It's like a very clean financial picture.
Yeah. I love that too, because that's really where we think about like where AI is going to go from the council. Like there's a lot of doomsday, of course, out there like, oh, it's just going to replace everyone. But it's like, we like to really think about it as like augmenting or like helping people practice at the top of their license, like doing more of the actual work that they want to be doing rather than the menial work that like you said, digging through the EMRs and trying to find those patients to match in the trials.
100%. We say top of your license all the time. That's yeah, very EMR world
Yes.
thing to say. The other thing we say all the time too, similar idea. I stole the line from a guy here in Kansas City called Dick Flanagan, who's an awesome veteran of our space. But healthcare moves at the speed of trust, and I think that's so true in the clinical trial space, and it's why AI isn't going to replace people in this world. It's like I'm not going to sign up for a trial that's like maybe feels a little scary. I'm a little bit like I might feel like a
Yeah,
guinea pig unless I trust that person that I'm going to work
totally. Yeah.
so, like,
There has to
AI
be some
might help,
accountability.
like, 100%, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, AI might get me there faster, but at the end of it, I'm not saying yes unless there's a human I trust on the other side. Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. And then switching gears a little bit, like I'm curious about your thought on, how there's been a lot of like PE-fication, like lots of private equity to buying up private practices or just kind of consolidating healthcare practices in general. How does that affect trial participation at the site level? Like, how do you think about that, or has that come up at all for you in
That's
trialing?
super interesting. Definitely has come up. I mean, there's same thing in the trial site side of things. Like the trial part of that business is also getting rolled up, whether that's through the buying of a physician practice or actually carving out the research side of it. So there's quite a lot of private equity roll up on the healthcare site side of the world, which can be a pro or a con for us. Like ultimately, it does actually make it a little bit easier to sell to because you have a single point to go into and work. That was kind of one of our early strategies was selling more to that part of the world, but um the definitely it's there. And I think it actually is, there's like pro and con again on how I think those folks are very interested in how AI can make those systems more effective, which like helps us get in and help work with them. Thinking of a political, like to your point of like, what's an outsider's view that that underestimates some of the work. Like sometimes private equity groups don't fully understand the space when they jump into it, and that can cause problems too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there could be some people listening to this podcast that are in similar roles to yours in the past or your co-founders in the past and thinking about founding a company someday. What was that moment like for you? And what was sort of your personal calculus for like, this is the time in my life I'm ready to do this? And in retrospect, are you happy you did it? Are you like, oh my gosh, I'm stuck in this now forever? Yeah, just curious, like what you can share with folks as they're kind of grappling with that decision right now.
I love talking about this actually because I do think I've always viewed myself as a little bit of an outsider to the entrepreneurial world. Like I never thought I would be an entrepreneur. I always wanted to be. I think it was deep inside me, but come from like a very, work for the company for a long time and get your pension type of family. And so it was a very, very big leap for me to get into the entrepreneurial space. My co-founders have multi-company foundings in the past. And so that helps for sure, like seeing that they've done this
You're like,
success.
is this normal?
Yeah, this is normal. Exactly. But it was hard for me. It was a big leap. It was a scary leap for me. So if anybody out there is listening and wants to just like run their fears by me, let me know because I love talking to people about it. But like, I think for me, it was this like perfect confluence of all this skill, all the background and skills that I had, like hitting this new wave of AI capability that it almost just felt inevitable. We like almost felt like we had to do it. It was like, this needs to be out there. It's a problem I've personally experienced and it's going to get solved through with these new technologies. And so it almost just felt like inevitable, and kind of collided too with an inner desire for me to do it. Would I recommend it to people? I think it's complicated. It's like, yeah, ultimately, yes, but I think it totally depends who you are. And I think early on, I was like, everybody should do this. It's awesome. Like you get to make your own rules and be your own boss. But then as you get deeper into it, like it's not for everybody. Like you have to
Yeah,
be
there are different pressures that you feel. Yeah.
Yeah.
daily. I mean, like hourly, momentarily, like it's just very, very different than working for somebody else because it's all extremely personal. What I try not to take it all personally, but it's all extremely personal. Like sign a big contract and you're through the moon excited. And then something bad happens 2 minutes later and you think like, this is the end of everything. It's all going to die. It's all going downhill from here. So, and that's hard. Like, that's hard. I think you have to have like a family that's on board with that and like willing to ride some of those waves out with you and support around you and like be willing to go in and know you're going to have to grow and change as you build this company in ways that you will never expect before you start it. But it's like all that hopefully that isn't too doom and gloom. Like it's also really fun. It's like I get to talk to people like you and work with the council and the amazing LPs that you have. Like that wouldn't have happened unless I did this. And so there's a lot of really cool stuff that comes with it too.
That's awesome. Yeah, you give me a little bit of PTSD from my first year founding the council. And everything feels personal, raising a first fund and all that stuff. So, but it's so, so rewarding. So, and I think it's good to be honest with founders that it's not going to just be like all rainbows and butterflies because, you don't want to just kind of found a company for the heck of founding a company because it is going to come with a lot of different pressures. But if you have something really specific that you're passionate about and you feel like the time is now and it has to be you, that's when I really see things going positively and being fulfilling. And to your point, like having the right support system makes a big difference.
And then you talked a little bit about this. It sounded like, it was a slow kind of accumulation, but like, was there any specific moment when you were working that was like, hey, this is too crazy at the site side. Like, I wish we had a way better tool. Like, I was curious. Yeah. There's like a specific moment that really led to that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so like at the site level, when I was doing that work, I had logins to every EMR across all of our site. Like I was the one guy that could go into every one of the systems. And every Sunday morning, I went and logged into all of them, pulled down the schedule for the week, mapped out who like could be a fit for each trial, turned that into a little spreadsheet for every site and like sent it out to all of them so it's like every Sunday I had to go in and do this. It's like, this should be so automated. It shouldn't. And then basically I brought that to Trevor and was like, this is what I'm up to right now. And he was doing LLM experimentation inside Zapier. And he was like, yeah, that's going to be completely automated in a matter of a couple of years. And then we brought in Ramon, who basically like built a prototype that went and did things that went and read patient notes, patient charts, like fully automated with deep into the chart, which completely blew my mind. And that for me was like, okay, yeah, this is going to get automated and we could be the ones to do it. The big why now in that for me was my world was always data, like I was always the document it discreetly and make sure it's all, like in the chart really, really cleanly. And hey doc, if you put it in a free text physician note, it's going to be gone forever and you're never going to see it again. And then in 2 weeks, Ramon built a prototype that like killed all of that. It was instantly like they can go read an entire physician note and bring back specifics with a like out of the box LLM model. And so to an extent, there's certainly a lot of work to make that way, way better. But yeah, it's just mind blowing. It was really cool.
That's awesome. And was there an assumption that you guys made early on that was completely wrong?
Ooh, I'm sure thousands. I'm struggling to think of one off the top of my head. Assumptions that we were wrong about. Yeah, I mean, I think we even underestimated like how challenge I think we underestimated how hard the political side of it would be, like to get buy-in and ultimately move through. You hear over and over and over again, sales cycles in healthcare are long, and like sales cycles in healthcare are long. Even if you think you can shortcut that, like there's sometimes you can and you can find some ways through it. But there's also, somehow, we just signed an MSA that took more than 18 months to sign. And like it's a great
Congrats.
MSA. We're really excited about it, but it took 18 months, like that's a lot of work and time. So not a very good answer, but I think like I don't know. I think we assumed, and maybe ambitiously so, that like we could find a way to shortcut that in some way. And sometimes it is how it is.
Yeah, for sure. And then you've talked about Trevor and Ramon quite a few times. Obviously, very different environment coming from Zapier. What did you see in the two of them being like, hey, these are the two right guys to be partners for the problem?
Early on, so I knew Trevor for 10 years before starting this company. We've actually been friends before we started the company. I didn't know Ramon before starting the company. Trevor did. Trevor had worked with him across multiple companies, and they've kind of followed each other through their careers because they've always worked really well together. But so thinking of Ramon first, the first thing Trevor told me about Ramon was he's a man of few words, but many lines of code. And like, it's just like exactly right. He actually is the like 10x developer that the mythical 10x
Awesome.
developer. Like he just gets stuff done so fast and so efficiently. So he's been amazing from a CTO perspective, and it's been so like since we started this company to now, Claude Code and like all of these solutions that make and develop engineers so much more effective have come out. So it's also been incredible to watch somebody like him like bring these tools on board and do so much more than he did even 2 years ago. That's pretty neat. And then Trevor, like I said, we met here in Kansas City 10 years ago. We get along really well. Our wives are really good friends. Like we're well connected, and we knew we'd work together well. We've kind of worked together on little projects around coming up towards trial before trially. So just knew that we would get along well. And he's like my exact opposite. Like I'm a very feel based, I don't know. I wouldn't say like process is my super strong suit. And Trevor is the exact opposite. Wants to deeply process, deeply like optimize everything, like make it all work really, really cleanly, automate everything. And so, I think that works really well together. It's actually like it can be challenging when we're both, I want to go one way, he wants to go another, but I think it makes our company better. We're kind of opposites pretty much across the boards, but get along really, really well.
Do you recommend co-founding with a friend?
That's a good question. We have had to put like one thing that I would say is very unique about Trevor is we've kind of approached it like therapy to an extent, like or like a couple. We've had to really work through that, I guess, and be very direct with each other. Like, hey, if we've got a problem, just let's just talk it out. We cannot let it fester. And we had to deal with that a couple times. Like I'm very good at hiding things or burying things deep down and not letting not and being a people pleaser. And I had to give that up and just be very direct. Like this is a problem and we need to work through it. And he's great at that. So the quick answer is honestly no. I don't think you should unless you have that. Like unless you can get to that type of a place, because I think it would be I think Trevor and I have a unique relationship with it. I think it would be difficult to do it otherwise.
Well, I was just going to say, as you sort of think of like outside of just the roles of like CTO, CEO, et cetera, how would you say you guys kind of divide and conquer, some of the major core components of the company, including the culture?
Yeah, it's a really great question. It happens organically, and it's grown and shifted as we've gone on to really early on. I was kind of like all of the external facing roles, all of like customer, investor, and sales side of things. But as we've gone on and, like pipeline's grown and we're starting to sell more, I'm definitely way more focused on the sales side of things. And we've positioned Trevor to be fully customer focused. And Ramon's like very, very good at the thing he's very, very good at. And he's been great. He's done an awesome job like growing into being a manager of engineers too, as our engineering team has grown. So Ramon's definitely like all things technical, but we've also kind of like, as Trevor has shifted more into the customer side and shifted a little bit of the product stuff to be more split between the two of them, where, he's bringing the external feedback and Ramon's fitting that into the overall like technical roadmap. So it's grown and evolved. And like from a cultural perspective, I think we're all responsible for different parts of it. Like I think the process part of Trevor and Ramon's brain is definitely very baked into our culture, like having clean process, having automating as much as you can, like build the robot, don't be the robot type of approach. And I think I'm maybe a little bit more of the like softer touch, like bring coming in with my kids and my photos of my kids from the weekend and like trying to make it a little bit less
That's
heavy at
awesome.
times. And so, yeah, I think we're just responsible for different parts.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And speaking of process, we again talk a lot about like inventing like processes from scratch, especially like on the first builder side. Tell us a little bit about that, like at Trially and like some of the things that you've really evolved from like a process standpoint, even.
Yeah, one that's front and center for us right now is just, and we're still figuring it out how to do it really well, but is really like baking in customer feedback into everything we do. Like I'm awesome at waking up at 3 in the morning with a grand product idea and putting it out there to the world, but that's not always the most helpful to just be like throwing my random ideas out into the world. And so, how do we bake in and solicit better, more directed customer feedback into the product roadmap and then into what actually gets built, and the sales side, like the sales feedback that we're getting through all of the conversations we're having. Again, like an awesome time to be alive for that is like we do a lot when appropriate, or when it makes sense, we record customer conversations with like tools like Fathom, and a lot of those transcripts then get fed back and put into tools that help us break that all into like, here's all the follow-ups, here's all the product ideas, here's all the sales feedback that actually feeds into our Slack and updates to. So anyway, we're automating a lot of those pieces, but really figuring out that's hard to actually. It's easy to like kind of put those tools in place to do that, but like how do you actually take the customer feedback, make sure it gets in front of the right engineer, and also make sure it doesn't disrupt the really important project that they're already working on, and prioritize that for them. AI is definitely making it easier to do it, but there's still a lot of like people components there that are really important. So that's one little example. Yeah, there's thousands of others.
No, but that one's so critical. I mean, I remember that, like, even from working at Komodo on the customer success side, like, we're always getting so much customer feedback. And it was just like very delicate to even try to like figure out like when to bring that up and how to prioritize that, given that the engineers are also working on an existing roadmap as well. And when does it make sense to, change that versus when does it make sense maybe to not change that and then have that conversation from a customer standpoint as well. So I'm sure like you're navigating all of that right now.
Yeah, and in the AI world too, there's so many shiny objects. There's so many like cool little new tools that could, like feel like they could change everything. So that's been interesting too. Like that's definitely been an evolution, especially for me to see how to introduce that in the right way or how to ignore
Okay.
it. When is it a shiny object and it's something we need to ignore, or when is this something that could totally change the way we do things and is really important to pay attention to? Obviously, from a technical perspective, like Ramon and Trevor are all over that and they're great at it, but getting to be the one that's out in front and seeing like the cool new tools at conferences and things like, it's difficult. To your point, it's difficult to know when to bring those things in.
Yeah. I feel like it's difficult for everybody right now just because like every single day some huge manifesto is dropping about, what's happened this week in AI or at Anthropic or OpenAI. And then all these, like you said, like little tools spinning out of those moments. And you're like, do we try it? Do we invest the time? Or do we sort of do this in batches? It's tricky right now. It's like hard to stay focused because everybody's like, you could spend every single day going 0 to 1 on a new thing, basically. So
It's
that's
cool.
like an art right now.
Totally. And also in spaces like, this is probably true in every space. So I'm sure it's true everywhere, but especially in clinical research, it just feels like there's so many problems, manual problems to solve, where it's like, there's all these things that have never adopted technology. Like people are still like the predominant way to document clinical data from a trial is still paper. Like that's the number one source of
Uh,
documentation for clinical trials. So there's like all these places where they've never even adopted any technology. And suddenly AI, you can go from like no tech adoption to like automating the whole thing using different AI tools overnight, which is super exciting, but it's also really shiny object inducing when you're building in this world of like, we could go solve so many problems. We got to, how do you stay focused? So, yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, can you tell us something you're most excited about looking forward with Triley?
Yeah, like I said, we're really turning the corner where we're starting to work with more direct with CROs and sponsors, and really excited to like blend those two worlds because, like I said, we're really coming from the site background where I feel like we really know what they want and need, and so now getting to bring that to the CRO sponsor level is really exciting. We have a couple of really large partner relationships in the works that I just like cannot wait to get over the line and introduce to the world as well. And, yeah, excited to grow the team. We've done a really good job of trying to stay super lean and grow with the team that we have. Like, how can we use tools to make this team scale to the next set of customers, et cetera? And I think we're at a point where we're starting to add a couple new names and faces to the team too, which is also really exciting. Yeah. So yeah, I think I think this summer is going to be a really big one for Triley. I can't wait to see how it unfolds.
Nice. Yeah, we're super excited and can't wait to also share when all the things are announced as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway, we're going to transition over to our rapid fire playbook. So we're just going to ask you some quick fire questions. Feel free to just say like the first word that comes to mind or a very short sentence, but I will go ahead and kick us off. So, what do you think is your most underrated skill that you've kept from your Epic and Cerner days?
I think it's still just working with docs, working with physicians, being able to understand and work directly with physicians.
And what healthcare narrative is overhyped?
I know this is supposed to be rapid fire. I'm looking for like the best one. I think that what I said before has really been playing in the back of my mind. So that like the trope of like misunderstanding how hard EMRs are, but also like there's also some overdoing of that, and there's some simplicity in there too. So like I think there's just a lot of misunderstanding of how EMRs work out in the world.
Then is AI a real unlock in trials, or do you think it's premature or early?
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm the most biased person you're going to talk to about that because I'm the one bringing AI to clinical trials, but without a doubt, like we're making jumps in the way that it works that just weren't possible before. So
Yeah.
yes.
And super exciting also when you're talking about like the 5 new patients, for that oncology trial. That's always exciting to hear.
Yeah. Yeah.
What would you say would make a startup most successful? Outworking everyone and sort of being like first to launch, or having the right timing and just sort of being like a little bit more intentional and maybe taking longer?
I think in healthcare, it's being more intentional. I think healthcare is a long game. I'm not of the opinion that it's a slow burn. So yeah, I would say timing and intentionality in healthcare is really valuable.
And then what's one piece of startup advice that you hear out there that you think is complete BS?
I mean, I just don't, partially I do, like you have to work really, really hard, but this narrative that you have to like sign your life away to it and you're going to have no experiences, but your company is not true. And I think is fraught with opportunity to be really unhappy. So I think you can build it and still have a family, for example, so yeah, I would say the 996 or whatever that trope is definitely irritates me.
Same.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if not Triley, what healthcare infrastructure would you attack next?
I really love the medical world. I think are extremely fascinating, and to me, they actually challenge the very nature of an EMR in general. Like EMR exists to structure data to get paid by payers, basically. If I don't have to structure that data to be able to utilize it well, like we're proving you don't have to structure that data to actually use it, what do I need an EMR for at all anymore? So like I think EMRs actually, they're not going to be disrupted because it's extremely difficult to in a long time. But I think that's a really interesting space to dig into. Like in the trials world, for example, everything's on paper today, or a lot of it's on paper today. If I could just record what's happening in the room with a patient and like document that data, I could skip a whole lot of technical implementation of a system to go do that work. So I'm really excited for these like very basic tools, like, just basic AI tools that can make massive leaps in the space.
Yeah. So you're predicting that there won't even be EMRs in the future, 20 years.
You heard it here first.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, that would be cool. Like it would just be a whole new kind of like paradigm essentially
Yeah.
of
Yep.
how we operate.
Yep.
I think it's true. I think it's possible. Again, like, yeah, I think that the very reason it's there is to get paid. And that structure is what's going to keep it
Yeah,
alive for a long time is like, that's the
totally.
mechanism by which you get paid. But past that, I don't think it's necessary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Kyle, thanks so much for joining us today. This has been awesome. Where can everybody follow you and learn more about Triley? And is there
Yeah.
anything you want to shamelessly plug while you're on here?
Yeah. I mean, I'm way too involved on LinkedIn, so you can find me on LinkedIn posting and commenting. Yeah, come to our website, ask for a demo, or reach out directly through LinkedIn, through email. Yeah, come engage on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was really fun.
Thank you.
Well, this was a really great conversation. It's always fun to chat with portfolio founders and just gonna like dive a little bit deeper with them. But
Yeah.
yeah, what stood out to you from that conversation?
Yeah, there was a lot, but ultimately, I liked some of the takeaways around just founding teams in general. I know when we invested in Triley, one of the things that had me most excited was sort of that duality of experience. And you and I talk about that a lot on the back end. And even when we're answering questions from a lot of LPs on the sort of, founder we're backing, I think it is hard to find founders and or founding teams that have that level of tension where it's like somebody is a deep domain expert and they've spent their entire career in that domain and they've never maybe worked inside of a venture scale company before. And then somebody else on the team has worked only in venture scale tech companies and they've never really worked in that legacy industry before. And sometimes we'll see it in like one singular solo founder, which is even more rare, but it's also rare to find teams like this where you have two people that have joined from a company like Zapier, which is completely, pure tech company from like the no code AI, pre-AI era. Helping people become builders before we could do things in code as non-technical people. And I think Zapier is also famous for like skipping their seed round, like raising a pre-seed, jumping straight to Series A, I believe, and just building a huge company and being very capital efficient. And so I'm like having people come in with that level of here's what it takes to scale a company to that degree. You could see how it might clash with somebody coming from healthcare, which is like we can't just move fast and break things. We have to do things the right way and deeply understanding how everything works. But I think it's a really, really healthy tension because sometimes if you have too much of one without the other, you might build a business that's too small, or you might be able to build a business that's going to end up having legal troubles or can't sell to customers because they don't have the credibility. And I think that was the second point for me was just around like founder credibility, because we've seen this across industrial tech, companies like Knox Metals, legal AI, companies like GCAI, and companies like Triley in the healthcare space and Joyful Health, where it's really the founder, that primary founder and CEO that has that industry credibility. I think a lot of VCs will sometimes discount that and they're like, well, that can't be the whole company. And that's true. But I think that first person that's selling like the first 10, 20, 30, 100 deals into the company with founder-led sales is going to be the difference between whether they make it to that point where they have the luxury to start scaling it or not. And being able to walk into the room and just establish that creativity is huge. So, right now, you see a lot of founders just kind of jumping into different industries because there's a lot of demand for investing in those industries, but not necessarily because they have that level of credibility or like 10 plus years in their industry. So I think both of those stood out to me, the duality and then credibility of the founding team.
Yeah, absolutely. I really love like that push-pull and attention that you were talking about, like with, the Zapier and then like with Kyle's experience. And I think like one thing that he said was like, him and Trevor knew each other for like 10 years. They were friends before this, long before they started a company. And so they are able to probably push each other a lot more than like, than some co-founding teams as well. So I think that's like a really great thing that they have because of that history as well. And then the other thing that, he didn't dive into too much yet, but just like he hinted at it like throughout the time of just like how EHRs are not necessarily interoperable. There's a lot of like political aspects of bureaucratic aspects of like just selling like into the healthcare industry. And I think that it is something that sometimes founders getting into this space will underestimate. And they think like even he even said himself, like, oh, I thought we could like maybe shortcut some of that also. But it really just takes like that hard work of, figuring it out, understanding the customer, understanding their process, and then going with that. And so I thought that was like a really helpful insight for him to share with people who are thinking about building in healthcare.
Yeah, you have to go in with a marathon mentality because sometimes it's a, obviously you have to be pushing the puck forward, but you're also just kind of waiting out these timelines and like you're at the whim of somebody else's process. So
Totally.
yeah, it's tough.
Yeah. Well, if you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review or share it with a friend and subscribe to First Builders wherever you get your podcasts.
Yeah, we'll see you next time.